So we'll see if it comes in there. You got live on that? Okay, we'll be just a couple seconds here. We'll see if it comes up live. All right. So again, apologies. We are in a cabin in the woods, so technical setup has been interesting and all that sort of thing. Oh, perfect. So it comes through. Great. Okay. So this is the Live Historical Detective Lounge. It's April 27th, 2026. We're coming at you from the Pacific Northwest, actually just a few miles from the border, actually a few mile from the border. And so we wanted to do a kind of a brief discussion today over a couple of techniques that are used in historical investigations. And I think about 3 weeks ago, we had Michael Yon on, and he might join or not. He had some scheduling things that came up. As you know, he's in Japan and, juggling about 1,000 different agendas. So there's no worries. But it's still open if he wants to come in here, and we'll plug him right in. So we may jump track a little bit from what we're doing, depending on when he comes in or if he comes in. But the door's open for him if he does. What we're going to do today is we're going to go over a couple things. One is in a conversation with Michael Yon about 3 weeks ago. He was mentioning that he said, I followed a pattern or a technique that he saw in a book called How to Read a Book. And I'd never heard of the book. So I was kind of like, okay. So that was interesting to me. And as such, we ordered the book. It actually came in. So we're going to go over it a little bit. I haven't delved in. As you see, there's no notes or anything as opposed to yet. But it's actually a very interesting book. It came out the first in the 40s, early 40s. Mortimer Adler wrote it. And he is very good at what I've read so far. He's very, very good at organizing and processing thought. And so how he organizes information is very good. How he goes about, how do you look at information to organize it, is very methodical. And it's actually a very good process. But again, I'd never read this until this week. But it's very, very good. And I'm absolutely fascinated by it. And I'm picking up a few techniques. So we're going to talk about that in the beginning. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about, after we talk about how you can read a book for historical investigations, we're going to look at how you process information, how you can store notes, different ways that we use to store notes, case files, real case files, historical case files. Then we're going to get in. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the process that we also use that's related. There's criminal defense investigation, and there's a great system that an investigator down in Florida called Brandon Perrone runs. It's criminal defense investigations. He literally wrote the book on it. He was F. Lee Bailey's investigator for a while, and there was no course. There's no nothing, right? It was just, if you were good at it, you did it. If not, there it is. And lawyers aren't trained on it. So private investigators are working for lawyers to provide that second set of investigators' eyes to help the lawyer, the attorney, to say, okay, was this really done the right way? To do that second investigation, to say, okay, where's the potential flaws in the prosecutor's investigation? But there's techniques that he teaches in that. And like I said, he's the godfather of all criminal defense investigators. There's techniques that he uses in that criminal defense investigation, which are fantastic for kind of tearing apart a historical book and saying, okay, where's the timeline? Where's the flaws? Kind of look at it and say, does this pass the smell test? Is there something missing here, or is there something that's at odds that we need to kind of iron out? What is more closer to the truth than not? And we're going to discuss those a little bit. We're using his little practice here, but it's a great technique. And then your kids can use it in school. It's fantastic for being able to kind of break apart information, put it in a different format so you can process it, right? Because narrative is telling me a story. It's designed to influence me. I need the facts that I can arrange them and then come to a conclusion. So we're going to go into that, the second part. And then if there's time, the third part will hit a little bit of the Kra Isthmus, the Kra Canal. I might talk about that maybe at another time, just because Michael's on there, because he's attacking it from the modern perspective, modern geopolitical perspective. We're talking the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the Strait of Malacca with that Kra Isthmus in the canal, wherever it may end up being, is a hot button issue right now. And like I said, we saw that in 2014, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but we won't go too much in detail. We may hold off on that one until we can get Michael on board with that one. So having said that, if you come up with questions, feel free to go ahead and put it in there. I can't see them directly, but there's Agent Nakamura over here, so she'll be able to pop up and show me if you have any questions or any comments on that. Feel free to chime right in. This is pretty open. A lot of this comes from there's a course that we teach. It was designed more for children and young adults because we found out, but adults can use it as well. But we found out that there's a lot of discrepancies in how young investigators that are coming into the field process information, how they see the world and how they view things is completely different in some ways than what we're used to. And it was more emotional based than evidence based. Even though you're an investigator, you'd think everything should be evidence based. What we found is they're not processing. It's cut paste, right? You're scanning information real quick, you're cut pasting it, and then okay, I've got it. Whatever feels good, bam, there it is. And they're not weighing evidence, they're not judging evidence. If it's on screen, they think it's legitimate. It must be real because it's on screen. There's a lot of problems. So we decided we would kind of help parents out, really. And it came from my daughter and her granddaughter, right? She wanted her granddaughter to think like, I don't know why, but she wanted to think like me and my dad did. I guess we did something right. Or she's insane. But basically looking at how you can think, right? How to think, how to process, how to be an evidence-based investigator in life, right? In other words, in school, what the teacher's giving you and that sort of thing. Don't just be indoctrinated, be educated. And that's kind of what we look at. How do you process information and look at it? And so there's Think Like a Detective course that we give, and it goes through a lot of what we're going to cover today. We didn't have this book in there because it was just, that's how we did things. I thought that's how you read a book. That's how I was raised. So there it is. But we're going to look at that. We're going to kind of get into that. And if you're interested, we have a course that we give primarily online again, it's for children and young adults, but we also do adults. And the differences in the casework. For the kids and the young adults, I usually give them something that from history that's kind of fluffy. There's nothing bad in it. They won't go into atrocity research or anything like that, or murders. And it'll be casework that they can do on cases like lost animals or missing persons that they can get into with a happy ending. But they have to do the same processes of weighing evidence, doing the research, weighing conflicting testimony and that sort of thing, so that they can come to it. And there's a lot of things in there. For the adult course, we will go into some cold cases and some historical cases of, then there's murder in there, and then there's, some war crimes and things like that. So we go into that. And it's really just the difference in the level of casework and what the subject is in the casework on that one. And my daughter did a real good thing with the detective club through it's a public-private school, and they work through, different types of investigators that come in: arson investigators, missing person investigators. There's a lost pet PI, private investigator down in, I think, Florida. And she's trained like two different canines. One canine tracks a dog, one canine tracks a cat, right? So all these different investigators, insurance investigators, fraud investigators, that'll teach your kids how to think like an investigator and the different ways you can go in there, and be an actual scientist, not like a religious-based scientist. When science is a religion, right? Believe in the science. No, the science is a process, right? It's just a procedure, and sometimes you can't replicate the same results. It doesn't mean one's wrong or the other yet. It just means I have a difference. Let's figure out what that difference is. So that's kind of what we're going to go into today. So we're going to go ahead and get started now. And the first thing is I'm going to show you, before we get into this book, I'm going to show you what I did, what Michael was talking about, the way I look at books and the way I've kind of talked to books. And when he mentioned that I must have been trained on it, I had to look back because it's just how I've always done it. I never thought of training, but I guess you could say it was from my dad, who actually, when in his younger years, he was a paratrooper 101st, very hua, super physical. I didn't get any of his attributes on that respect, but he actually had a pretty serious car crash right after he married my mom, and he was going back in, I think, his third enlistment, and then he went, did the OCS route, or went to become an officer. But he did three enlistments and then breaks in service. So his total time was 32 years in the Army. Right, 20 is like normal. You retire. He had 32 years on his final DD 214 of total time, and it was 14 years of enlistment in that. Right, and there's like 3-4 breaks in service. So he just kept going back in the Army. But he had a huge wreck, and it was in a Mustang, a little yellow Mustang, right? He was getting married, and he was going from Memphis, Tennessee, where they got married, back to Fort Polk, and he was going back down that way, and a semi truck hit him head on, and it crumpled the Mustang, and he was in a coma for 3 days. They didn't think he'd come out. He came out, but according to him, he had to reconnect all his synapses. And then he got into social work psychology. So he went infantry, hua, airborne, radio man, carrying all that crap. And then waterman as an airborne, and the 101st Airborne when it was still airborne before it became air assault. Now he's going into more of the mental side, right? Social work services, that sort of thing, psychology. And he's like, okay, what are we going to do? So he works with that, and he would do things like suicide autopsy, combat stress casualties, what they call it back then. Now they call it post-traumatic stress, but he's like, it's a combat stress casualty. And then he would work with, family support groups and that sort of thing, and cohesion, what keeps people fighting, cohesion, commitment, communication, confidence, all that. He worked into it, but he had to rebuild his brain. And I looked at his old books, and he had one that was the Theory of Collective Behavior by Neil Spelzer. So I'm looking at that as a kid, and I remember I'm reading it, and I knew you could write in books because he simply had a word on the side. It said BS, right? The full word bullshit, right? He's like, so he's arguing with the author. So that taught me a couple things. One, write in the margins of the book, and two, you can have a conversation with the author, right? No, that's not right. I don't understand this. What are you talking about? Here's your notes. So it's a back and forth with the author. So what I'm going to do is I'll go through a little bit of that and how you can look at a book that I do it, and then we'll compare it to what Mortimer Adler talks about in his book, how to read a book, and then what's kind of the difference, and go through that. And it's really a good system, I think, for being able to extract as much information and understand it. In fact, Mortimer Adler had a good quote. I'm paraphrasing it. I wish I could remember it exactly, but it's basically, before you can say, I agree, I disagree, or yes or no, you have to first say, I understand, right? So before you can agree to anything or disagree with anything or say I'm neutral on the subject, you first have to say, I understand it. And how many people actually understand what they read in a book fully, or the subject that they're reading about fully enough to now make an informed decision? And a lot of people now read for more entertainment, or they just read to feel like they have knowledge, but they don't have a full grasp of it. It's just, they're because of media saturation and the way the media is set up, rape of the mind tactics. It's more of the opinion. What opinion am I supposed to have to give me an emotional satisfaction feeling? And then that's what I'm going to go with, right? And that tends to be most of what people go into. So we're going to talk about something a little different today, and that's how to read a book that you will understand the book a little bit better. So the first part is, yes, write in a book. Look at a book, examine a book. So the first thing you can do, in fact, we'll look at this one, is you get the book and you say, okay, what's the subject? Who's the author, right? Most people I've seen, unfortunately, will get a book and they just like, wow, everybody's reading it, right? It's on Oprah's book list. I'm going to read it, right? She has a book list anymore, but that's it. Who is this author? What's his background? Where's he coming from? What's his paradigm, right? What other works have they done? And then look into that, look into the author, right? He's going to have, you can never eliminate your biases. It's the same thing when you're investigating a witness, right? Does the witness know the murderer, or do they know the victim, right? Are they related to the person that's alleging abuse, or are they with this person? Or are they neutral, right? Are they business partners with this person, right? What is the background? What are they going to be? Even if they're trying hard not to be biased, you're going to be biased. All human beings have biases. All authors, no matter where you're from or how much you want to put in there, are going to have a bias. So all you're doing is saying, okay, where are you coming from, right? What's your bias? And so I can identify that as I'm reading with my biases and kind of reduce that to try to be as neutral as possible, or at least, what are you selling me, right? That's it. So look at the author, say, okay, what is the author's work? What's their background? Where are they coming from? Have I read anything in there? What are their biases, limitations, things like that? What's their experience? Are they even experienced to write about this thing? And then you kind of skim. And the first thing you do is you kind of I always look at okay, what do they say the book's about the author? Okay, that's the propaganda. I always do a background research, right? Because whatever they put in the front covers is going to be, the about the author. That's what they want to tell you. That's what the publishing house, the promoters are telling you. I want to get a deep dive. Okay, what is he really, right? What is this dude really? And I have a somewhat of an advantage. I can go back in and do background checks, but it's easy enough nowadays with the internet. You can go in and get a lot about the author and what they do. The next thing is you kind of look at the table of contents. You kind of skim it and go, okay, what basically is he going to cover in this thing, right? Okay, you kind of go through there, and then you do a skim, right? Literally, you kind of look through it and go, okay, what is the subject? What is the thesis of this book? Why? What is he trying to tell me and sell me? So do I even want to spend my time on this book, right? Yeah, okay, Oprah suggested it, but is this really going to be what I need, right? Is this going to enhance what I don't know, right? That's the thing I want to know. Is this going to enhance what I don't know? I don't want to reread things that I already pretty much know a lot about, except if I have time, and then I may go over it to see what I'm missing, or validate sometimes in myself, like, this guy also says it. I want to know what I don't know. And that's what I'm going to skim. What is he? Is this 70% or more that I don't know? Right. I want to get in this book, right? I'm going to prioritize this book. And that's the first thing. You kind of skim it, you kind of get an overview, and then you read, and then I go through it. Now, where I differ from Adler is Adler will tell you, and we'll go into this a little bit later, Adler will say, read it through the first time on one go so you get a whole view. I do that during the skimming. He will actually read the full book to get the plot and then go back and take it apart. And he says, for example, if you're reading Shakespeare, right? If you're reading like King Lear, when he was taught in school, he would go through one passage at a time every day. He says, I didn't know at the end of that, I didn't know what the plot was, right? It's like, what is he telling me? Read the whole thing. And then he goes back. But again, that's a difference that I have with Adler, and whatever works best for you, right? So whatever works good for you is the way to do it. The second thing I do is when I'm reading through it, I will take notes. And there's different types of notes that I will take, depending how much I'm getting into it or not. So for example, this is Red Famine by Stalin's War in Ukraine and the Apple Bomb. And so if I have new information or if I have information that I need to check, I'll put tabs in there with nothing in it. So, okay, go in here and check it. And then I'm writing in the book. I'm writing in the margins. I'm saying, okay, hey, how does this work? Right? What am I doing? And you go through there. And then if you see things that are linked, you link it to another book, go to that other book and start comparing. And I do that all in once, right? And he calls it syntopical comparison, where you read two books. But on the first go around, I'm pretty much underlining things I don't know or things that have linked in with something else. Those are the two things I kind of link at. And then the comparisons you can do. So to compare two books, which is very important. Really what you want to do when you read is compare it to everything, right? This is what I don't know, but these are the parts I know. How does that link up with other books? And to give you an example of that, of the comparison, we're going to look here with this one. So when I was studying Roman society, okay, there's a book on Carthage, right? This is Carthage and everything it did and what it was about. But I want to compare it because how did Carthage initially successful, but then how did it fall? And how did it fall by Rome? So I need to compare these two civilizations, the pros, the cons, the advantages, the disadvantages, the history, the organizational structures between these two, and then compare them in there, right? With two dissimilar authors and see what they say. Because this guy's going to come at it from Rome versus Carthage. This guy's going to come at it from Carthage versus Rome and all the other things. And only between both of these do I now have a better picture, not the complete picture, but a better picture about the subject, right? Going into that. And we're going to switch over here again. This is, apologize for the kind of the weird setup here, but I'm at, like I said, a remote cabin. So we've got things duct taped together here. And let's see if this will work. Maybe, maybe not. All right, let me try one more time. And I'm just going to see if I can do this. And again, I apologize. What if I cut my camera off? Can I make it smaller? Nope. Nope. All right. Well, we'll just do it this way. So here we go. So looking at this, what you'll see in this one, because I was actively researching, right? I had a specific reason that I want to read this book for, right? It's not just a general knowledge. It's I need to glean information from here. And so what you're going to see in the beginning is on these notes up top, you have the thesis. Let's get over here. All right. Hopefully this shows up here. Nakamura, how's it looking? Good? Okay. So what we're looking at here is your central thesis, right? So McKay posits, so I'm already saying what's going on. Okay, perfect. So I'm already saying what's going on, and probably hard to say, but it says McKay posits the reason for Rome success was manpower accessed, right, caused by alliances early, right? So in other words, cut to the chase, what is his overall thesis, and then what supports that thesis? And then you can kind of go through, and then you put your margins, you're arguing, you're debating, or putting questions in the side, and then you go through, and then you have your highlight notes that say, okay, this is what's going on, right? So Rome starts out in an alliance with the common language and religion, and allows time to build their power base without undue burdens, right? So that's his thesis, what's supported in there, and then you look for secondaries to say, okay, let's go forward and see, is he right or is he wrong? But that gives me an idea about Rome. Okay, what was the advantage it had early on to be able to build up a power base so that it could eventually both compete with, survive, and then eventually conquer Carthage, right? And then we go through here, right? So Roman lands, and then we get in the organizational structure. And so that is, and you see that goes throughout. So at any point when I'm comparing these, I've already kind of bookmarked them, right, with what's happening. So I can go in there very quickly and say, okay, here's the topic. What is his evidence? Bam. and then we can go into the evidence. And then I compare that with this author and other previous books, which I didn't bring because I only have a small bag for this trip. But I go in here and you can see, here's the other evidence, right? And so now you compare it. And so on this case with the fall of Carthage, he has a different idea. And what now goes in there is they didn't have a unified. They had something more akin to the Austro-Hungarians, where there was a number of different groups that were operating and they didn't have a fully common base before they started expanding, right? So unlike Rome. So what was the difference, right? And so right here, you can actually see that they agree. So whereas Rome started early with manpower aligning upon language and religion as commonality to form its base, here we see that the lack of unifying culture, language, or even purpose caused the wear support of Hannibal at Italy, right? So in other words, they weren't unified enough. They didn't have the cohesion to be able to maintain it, right, with Carthage. And that came from the structural base. And so by kind of blending these two together, do you get the full picture? But you have to debate. You have to look at it. There's arguments in here where I'm like, where does it get that information from, right? Look up the source documents, because they'll look at source documents together, and you'll see them in a different way. So looking at these two now gives me a better picture, right? So that's one way. That's called syntopical, right? Where you put both together, and you begin to compare and you begin to have a conversation with both authors. And that's really how I look at a book, is you look at it by comparing and making a conversation. You're talking with the author. He's talking to you, and you can debate him. You can argue him. You can agree with him. You can disagree with him, but you need to write it down because you'll forget. And then later on, as you gain more knowledge over the years, you can come back to it and go, oh, wait a minute. What about that? Right? I want to now compare this as a historical model versus something else. Now you can come back and look at it. And that takes a number of readings, right? And so for me, knowing when I got this book, I'm going to tear into it because I want to answer the question, why did one succeed and one fail, right? When the advantages appeared to be with one, and that's how you delve into that topic and then look at it. And then other books over time come into and work with those cases. So that's syntopical, and that's how you can kind of compare. And that's a form of note where you have all of your little topics up here, as you can see. That's where you have those tabs, so you can go in there quickly and reference both of them. And then if you have a third book and a fourth book, then you add those to it, and then you're good to go. Now, on top of that, so once you've done that, the next thing that you can do is, here's another process, and you're probably familiar with this one. I think between Michael and me, we have sold more copies of this than the Dr. Juice Merleau did, which is good. That's a good thing. The more people read this, along with Edward Bernay's propaganda, you've immunized your mind, right? So you're becoming more of a rational versus an emotional based thinker, and that's great. So that's a good thing. But I'm going to show you kind of a neat way, the different type of this. So a lot of this was psychological conflicts, right? So Dr. Juice Merleau, I looked him up, I researched him. He comes at this from the psychological, right? The psychoanalytical side of things, right? What is going on in the process of the brain on a psychological level to cause people to do it? Not necessarily political, but he's talking the mechanisms of control and how they're kind of hardwired into human beings, and how that knowledge of kind of the psychological formation, the psychological organizational structure of humans, how that is then utilized and weaponized against us, right? That's kind of the thesis of his book. And he shows both the Nazis and the communists use that same technique. And then he doesn't get to it, but I would argue that the United States has that too. In fact, more so, because we have Hollywood and Madison Avenue, right? We've got this on steroids. And if you read Bernays, you'll see the actual techniques. So looking at this is a different way of doing what we did with these two books, right? We were talking with those two together, but I didn't know a lot about the psychology of it. So I go to my dad, right? Because he knows all these processes. And so what I did was I started with my notes, and I would write my notes in here and underline things. And I simply handed it to my dad. And it's hard to see here, but there's a yellow highlighter. That's my dad. So my dad would go through, after I went through it and kind of put questions or comments, he would go through, and then he puts his comments on the side. So I have my comments, he has his comments. I know what my highlighter is, and I can see what his highlighter is, because I would underline and he uses a yellow highlighter. And so now we're able to kind of compare it. And he hands the book back to me and we talk about it. But I now have his notes and his observations where he would find things I wouldn't. He would find things that are very important from his perspective and his expertise and his knowledge base that I couldn't see because I don't have that knowledge base. But in the same book, you can have a conversation with three people now. We're conversing with Dr. Merlou. I'm conversing with, Al Sr. And then he's in turn is conversing with me, and we go back and forth. And from that, we're really able to kind of flesh out a lot of things in here that are very interesting, right? And so that's how another way that you can use the book and you can use these systems to kind of look in and have conversations. And for me, this is a very nice system. And this book is now even more special, I think, for me, because, when my dad passed away about 3 years ago, it's now in here, right? So in other words, I can still have a conversation with my dad in some ways, an intellectual conversation, because I've got his notes and he's gone, right? So now I can look at this and go, hey, this is what dad was trying to talk about. And I may understand a little better later on some of his concepts. And in turn, I can hand this to my kids and they can hand this to their kids and they can write in it. And at the end of this thing, we have, generational conversations with this intellectual idea that, Dr. Merlou was putting out there. So that's another thing that you can do. But it requires, it stays in the family to be really, really meaningful. But that's another way that you can understand it and look at it and save it, because over time, you'll come into information that now it makes sense and you want to go back and be able to reference it. And so that's why you'll see not all tabs have the notes, but each tab was important, right? There used to be blue tabs in here, but as I figured things out, then that goes into the red tab. Okay, I got it. And that's just how it is. So that's kind of one way that you can be able to go through and have syntopical, but with another expert, right? If you're not military and you're reading a military history, depending on what kind, is it naval history? Is it, infantry, land war? Is it, aviation based? Find an expert that in that, right? And send them that book, do your notes, right? Highlight it, give it to them. Hey, can you go over this and kind of see and have them highlight it, right? In some different color. They can go through their notes, and now you're comparing those notes, you're comparing that information. So that's another way that you can do this in there. And then the other way I wanted to talk about is something that I do with this that's very important. Once you've kind of done that process, now you can go into a little bit further, and you've got the book. Now we're gonna take the details out. Once I understand it, I've dug through it. Maybe I've bounced it off another expert. We've talked about it. We've debated it. I've looked at source docs. Now I know pretty much in here what I believe is sustained by the evidence, or what I believe matches what I what I want to talk about. And then you get a little notebooks, and these are fun. Fortunately, I got these in Thailand or Japan. Where did I get these? Thailand or Japan, but they're great because they fit on books. And I just put a rubber band around it, and then it carries with it. So every book most books in my bookshelf will have this attached to the book, and they're just the right size, usually for books. But I can't find them over here for some reason. But basically, what I'll do is now I'm ready to write, and when I'm writing, I'm reinforcing that knowledge. So first off, is I've kind of read through it, and I'm highlighting. Now I'm debating it or discussing it, either with another book or with another expert, and sometimes with both. And now I've got a pretty good idea, and now I'm going to extract it, and I'm learning even further, because writing is important. When you write information down after reading it and synthesizing it and writing it down, even if you're just rewriting a quote, you're going to understand that information even more so, right? You may not memorize it. That's not the point. The point is to really understand it and flesh it out, because even as you're writing it, you're like, oh, okay, I get what he's saying, right? And that's how you kind of go through. And then this becomes a good reference, because now you can go through here sometimes and you'll find out, okay, you can organize the information as you see it. Sometimes the author won't, because the author's narrative, they're trying to keep you engaged emotionally sometimes to sell a book, especially for non-academic audiences, or even academic audiences nowadays. They need to stay entertained. But you can kind of go through and find those salient points that are going to support what you were investigating or you were looking at. And that's how you kind of work this. And so you can organize that information, you put it out there, you can begin to synthesize it, right? And you organize it in a way that's meaningful for you, where you can kind of say, okay, here's the difference. Because I wanted to know what's the difference between Austro-Hungarian occupation of Ukraine, the German occupation later in World War I, it's a little bit later on, and then what the Soviets did, right? And just lay it out, right? And that gets lost out. So we're fleshing it out. We're actually going to get more on this in criminal defense investigation. But that's kind of what you do, is you bring out the information now that you understand it, and then you organize it. And to me, if you do this beforehand, sometimes it kind of gets lost. So you really want to understand it to flesh it out. Sometimes you can do it to flesh it out, but I use note cards for that before I put it in a notebook, because then I can rearrange the note cards, and I'll show that next. But that's how you go through here. And that's one way of doing it, is you're putting the quotes in there, you're reorganizing the information. So if you need to then synthesize this with the next one, I can go through here. I don't have to flip the whole book. So if I get another book on the Ukrainian famine, I have my notes and then of the most important things that I was looking at, and then I can compare that through. And then I go, wait a minute, I think they were talking about that, but I don't have it there. Now I can go to the book. But you just have a bunch of these notebooks and it makes it pretty easy. And so that's what I do. And then there's just a rubber band that, puts those two together, and then that goes on the shelf, right? So those two together work out pretty good. And then the other fun part for investigators is if it's analog, we'll talk about that later, but if it's analog, it's a lot harder to hack now. Half the people can't spy on you. So you can write whatever you want in there unless they physically come in here and steal it, or I'm showing it as if I'm doing now. You don't know what the heck I wrote. And that bugs some people. So it's kind of fun to kind of get inside their head. The other one, I think it's on this one. So others that aren't, they're historical in some ways, but they also are in active cases. Yeah, this one I can show. So this one is Red Carpet, and it's about Hollywood's. It's a history, but it's doing things now. Why was the CCP able to manipulate Hollywood films, right? Why were they so effective at blocking historical truths in Hollywood films, right? Putting out their propaganda. So this is one theory in there. Eric Schwartz about that. And these are the notes. And in this one, different colors come through for me because, okay, these are action items, right? So we wanted to look more at Rennie Harlan, who actually was a Quisling producer that went over to help out the CCP to get their film industry going, right? So he helps out a genocidal regime to get their film industry, their propaganda machine going. And then he even jokes in here that he's a spy. Well, if you're joking about it, game on, dude. So this is okay. This is the network, right? This is what you're looking at. But kind of flag and organize those things. But that would get lost in a big book like this, right? In other words, if I'm looking at this and I have to go through all this stuff, that's going to be tough, right? So it's like, okay, let me go through here. And then that also helps you. So it's just this. And then as you're reviewing it, okay, here's some action items that we need to do. And that helps. So you can also do that as an action item within that notebook. And you can have two notebooks. One is your action items for project, and the other is a general about that book itself. And this is pretty much the same on Kwaiwu. This is also another one. If you think United Front, that's a portion of Kwaiwu. Kwaiwu is a much bigger program that's pretty huge. In fact, we just got a client just sent a article from a Miss Yu that had a great one on the United Front work organizations up north in Canada, just a few miles from here, about all the bad stuff they're doing. It's like how they're networked. But this goes into that. And this takes a very, very complicated information, and it talks about it, and we break it out, right? So I have these blocks where when I'm talking to people, this book was to help me to kind of coalesce that information about Kwaiwu and begin to process that a little easier in here for other people. So that works. And I can give this book to another person with my notes that'll help them, right? So this is kind of like the Cliff's notes or the Al's notes on a book that I can hand it out. So a couple different purposes. One is a case work that you're doing, action items. Another one is just on the book itself. And then some you can actually attach that goes with the book that'll help people take some very academic and complex issues that are very large and kind of distill it down. That makes sense. And then I use different colors, pens sometimes, like, okay, red is when I got action, black is okay, that's just information. So whatever system works for you is the best, right? I mean, at the end of the day, however you want to read a book is the best. But there are different ways to be able to do that. So the final one we're going to talk about, now we've talked about, that's how I do it, right? And I live for little Post-it notes. These are if I have to write on it. And then if I don't actually carry a 10 around with these little guys. So when you go to archives or whatever, you can put these on there. Oh, that's a good segue here. One last thing before we get back into this book is actually on hang on just a second. It's actually going to be on notebooks. So larger notebooks, how you store information in loose format. We've tried different ways, and I love the Japanese book stamp binding system. And there's different ways you can do it. But I would have had articles that are printed out. They're not necessarily books, and papers that you write. And you want to be able to access it right over time, because anything on digital can disappear. If you physically can't hold a medium in your hand, it's going to disappear. if it's on the cloud, if it's on a disk, right? Everybody with a 3/4 inch disk, or the 5.5 or 5 1/4 inch floppies, or the 3.5 inch disks, or even little, sometimes USBs, the information gets corrupted, it gets lost. And like those floppy disks, where can you go, right? How you physically, to put that medium in there and look at Lotus Notes, you can't do that anymore without special. You have to have a system set up and maintained so that you can do that. 3.5 inch, or the little floppy disks. What are you going to do with those now? You can't. Zip drives. How many people are going to read a zip drive, right? So unless it's paper and you hold it in your hand, it's going to go away. That's why people put things in the cloud. I don't usually work with them. I don't rely on them, because you just put your information in something that can go up like that, right? So, and be stolen and all that, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I will transfer things to a paper medium. And there's probably a real old guy out there yelling, "Why aren't you doing it in stone?" Yes, if I had a stone carver on the payroll, I would put him in there and put things on stone, but I don't. So this is just a paper that I wrote for when I was going through the master's in history. Yep. So this was Master of History through American Military University, but it was just a paper, one of the papers. But I put it in here, and then what I do, which I feel is important, is you have your notes in the back. So okay, here's the paper I wrote, but I also want to know, how did I get to that information, right? So I go in here, and this is what you wrote, your notes and your rough drafts, and you put those in the back. So if you need to go back to it, you can look and say, how did I come up with that? Oh, okay, here it is. Because it's not just a footnote. It's your thought processes, right? It's what other things are in there, and kind of that initial draft. And, oh, you know what? I did think about that. Okay. And you could put those in there, like, what the heck was I thinking, right? And so you put those in there. And sometimes in the editing process, you have to cut things out, right? It's on the cutting room floor, as film folks would say. Well, but sometimes those are very important later on. They may not be evidently important in the beginning, but you keep your case notes in there, and okay, that's important. Oh yeah, you know what? I need that. And that stays in there. So that's another mechanism of just saving your own stuff. But it's a Japanese stab binding, and you can use different things. I just use this one, was like the surgical, the cat gut stuff for sutures and things of the cat gut, because it stays forever and animals don't eat it. But it's really strong, and basically just bind this yourself, right? And then you can just undo it and you rebind it again. Pretty easy to do. Just have to have a special punch, but it works out pretty good. And that's for those papers. The other thing is, when you're doing investigations, sometimes it's just articles. So always print the articles out. Don't just have a bookmark, because it goes away. Even the archives, the internet archives, they're getting in there and things are getting erased, which it shouldn't, but it is. But you can go through, you can make covers for it, if you're feeling artistic that day. So this was, Uncivil State of Affairs, Anti-Catholicism in Thailand, 1940 to 44 by Shane Strait. And then Control Over Chinese Schools in Thailand, 1932 to 44. By Intrapun. So basically, this is I was using it at the time to kind of figure out Pibun Songkram and that nationalism, and it's two related topics, right? How does Thai deal with foreign philosophies inside Thailand, and how are they separating that to try to become more anti-colonial, as you were? And they looked at those two mechanisms of what they saw as colonialism in there. And so there's, again, notes in there, right? So I've got my notes so I can say, okay, what are the commonalities? What's going on? That's syntopical comparison between the two. They worked well. So I keep them together, and that's like the same kind of topic, but you have it in there. So you have a record of that. And then, get fancy with the art cover, because you got to experiment it. But you can put that in there and you save that as your notes, right? Even on magazine articles or academic journals and things like that. So this one was, again, and you can put topics in one all together. So you have this that you can also hand to other researchers and go, hey, here's something that might help you out in what you're researching. So for example, this one is manipulation techniques and its effects on military groups, right? Between the Junes, the French communists, from the collapse of France's invasion of Russia, Communist Party in California, 1935 to 1940, the Communist Party in Great Britain, the Comintern in the war, 1939 to 41, filling in the blank spots. So basically about information war and manipulation on militaries that between wars and before wars, and sometimes during the early part of wars, that will degrade the ability for cohesion, confidence, commitment, that will degrade the fighting spirit, as you were, or the commitment to it. So, pretty good. Like I said, you put them in here, you put your notes in there. This one I didn't have too many notes on, but I would highlight. I didn't highlight them or put the sticky notes, but I highlighted it. But it's all the same topic, right? It's on the same subject, so you can all put that together, and then that just goes on your shelf. But you always have it, right? And then when you're cleaning it up, half the time you physically look at it and go, "Oh yeah, I forgot I had this. Let's look at that." The final one we're going to look at is sometimes just notes, right? So this is just my raw notes, and I just keep it in here when I'm at an archive or I'm interviewing a subject or anything like that, or person of interest. You can put them in here, and then you have your notes, right? So they're all set up. And then this one's unclassified, but I put that, the topic on there. So you have your notes you can always go back to, but separate them and organize them is very important, because when you have something in your mind, you want to go reference, where was that? Just get to it. Because if you spend more than 30 minutes on it, you've kind of lost your train of thought, and, you wasted a lot of time. The final one for organization you can look at, which I like, is, again, the Japanese stab binding, which is, I was somewhat getting better at it. Actually, I just had my daughter do it. So eventually the ones that look good, that's my daughter. The ones that are like, what is that? That's me. But these are from the archives in Thailand, which is very good. So I was very fortunate to be able to go into the archives in Thailand, and this is the survey materials from it. And then you could actually get the photocopies of the archives themselves. They're all on microfiche. And again, physical media, if you have it, you can't get it from scans, right? So even in the US, there's a lot of stuff you cannot get on scans. People think that's why they rely on AI. Is so dangerous. It's the tip of the iceberg. The AI can only see a certain amount of information. It can't go beyond certain levels. And most of anything, even if you have the internet and you have full access to the Library of Congress, there's a tremendous amount of information that has not been scanned. You physically have to go to the archives or write to the archivist, right? And sometimes you have to pay a fee, and they'll go look up the information for you. So that's the problem with a lot of the I don't use the word kids, but a lot of the people under a certain age group nowadays believe that if it's on an electronic screen, that's the truth. No, you have 10% of less than 10% of the information is on AI. And they're wanting people to go ahead and rely on this for information. See, I'm already getting worked up. Calm down. So no, information is back there. You're gonna have to dig and dig and dig. And even this is which is historical from the 1930s and 40s in Thailand, the government records. Even this is a distillation. We were able to locate some people that were still alive that were around this group and go talk to them, and then get theirs, because that doesn't show up in a report, right? Because you edit that. You have to edit that for brevity, for political reasons, for, just you don't think it's important at the time. So information, there's always more information out there. Always, always, always keep digging, right? Never think you know everything. You're never going to know everything. Just keep digging, keep digging. But that's what we did. And we had good translators that would go in there and translate it for us so that we understood it, line by line. But that's pretty much these archives from Thailand that we're very fortunate to get. And that's another one. And you put all these in protection case, and they're all together. So I have a subject that I can go to. So pretty much anything and everything you can do. And the final one, I'm going to show you two things before we transition to the book. For those that know, so I started studying the New Testament stuff. So I was Jewish, and then I just recently on Easter converted, took baptism. So I was studying the catechism. I was studying the Bible, right, from the New Testament, because I have no idea at the time. I still don't. I'm still learning. But you go through, and this was my notes. I think I drove the priest nuts. But basically, I'm like, in red, those are my questions. Question 1, question 2. So I would write down what it was telling me. But okay, here's my questions in red, and then action items. When I go to the class, I go, okay, 1, 2, 3. Now we can go back over it. So you're organizing your thoughts and your questions to be ready to be able to have it there and to go through, right? So you keep that on a physical medium. Now I can go, okay, I can reference this at some future time and go through. Or if somebody tells you something different, you can go back and go, did I really understand it right? Okay, yeah, I did. Or no, I didn't. That kind of thing. So different colors are very important for helping you to organize information. If it's all the same monotone, for me anyway, it blurs out. If it's a red or a yellow or green, it'll be, to me, it's different and it's better. It stands out and you can kind of work with it. And toward that, what am I going to do next? Oh yeah, the final thing for recording. I'm going to show you two things that I do with casework. I've done it with historical, and I've done it with like insurance fraud or investigations like that. You have to do witness interviews, or you have to kind of review things. Sometimes if you're driving between locations, to stop and to write, you don't have time, but you want to keep what's in your mind, or you want to be able to go things out, or the interview that you've got. This is just technical geardo kind of stuff. There's two recorders that I use. I get asked this a lot. The first one is Sony. I just love Sony products. They're fantastic. I don't get any money from them. I don't get anything free from anybody. But basically, some clients are pretty good. I'm very lucky. I got some good clients. But this is a little Sony recorder, right? You can set up for voice recorder, all kind of different profiles. If you're in a one-on-one interview, if you're doing voice notes, or if it's an open room and I need to do that, you can actually set the recording profile. The best thing I know is looks like a 70s gangster film, is the USB, right? So bam, I could just do that, put it right in there. And that's excellent for working through files, and then it'll transcribe it, and then you can put it in. So having a voice recorder with you is really good. I prefer a cassette, but they don't really make those anymore. But I have it here, and as soon as I can, I'll load it into a computer, back it up 2 or 3 different ways. But it is digital, so it can disappear. It's just the nature of the beast now. But as far as you can, this is pretty good, and I'll keep as many as I can on here for that. And if I have book information as I'm reading a book, I'm talking to this, I'm having a conversation, and I'm saying, what about this? What about that? What about the other? If I'm in the groove and it's going fast and writing will slow me down, I'm going to hit here, and then I'll go back and write, right? So I've done another reinforcement of the learning, if that makes sense. So that's first level, and it just puts in your pocket. You can put it wherever you want to go. The second level just came out, and it takes it to another level, depending if you're a lawyer or you're an investigator, and that's the Plowed. And so this is a digital recorder. So if I can get it out of here. So this is a digital recorder. That's the case, pretty thin. It goes in your pocket, and it is, when it records though, the AI. The problem I have with this one is I can't use this for a lot of stuff because it's AI and the security on it. Anything with AI right now, unless you have a closed system, which actually we got a client that's working on that, and another guy that's working on that. But you can put this on your phone, right? So you have your phone, and it's got that little system set up there. And within legal privacy, I'll make sure that they're notified here in Washington State or wherever state I'm in and who I'm calling with to maintain legal privacy. I'll get their permission, record the call, etc. But that's all you do. You put it right on the back there, and it's recording their conversation. It's crystal clear. It's remarkably clear. And you're not worried about the speakerphone and other people hearing it. Still, just you and that person. And then you can talk to persons of interest or witnesses, and then you've got that right on the back, and it records it, and instantly it transcribes it in AI, and it even understands what kind of a call you're doing or what kind of conversation it is, and it will put an outline. So you have a basic transcript, word for word transcript. It'll identify different speakers, speaker 1, speaker 2, speaker 3, and you can say speaker 1 is person of interest, John Smith, and it'll say John Smith said this, and it'll say you said this. It can differentiate voices, add that to the transcript. And then it can do an outline. So there's the transcript, the raw data transcript, and then it'll do an outline. So for meetings, conversations, like large town hall meetings or whatever, you can put it in there and it'll do an outline, right? And then at the end, it'll even identify, even in like 2-hour conversations. This thing's worked, I think, 6 hours once. It didn't even die. But it'll look at that and it'll realize do outs. So like if there's a passing conversation that somebody in the audience said, what about this? What about this? And the guy goes, well, I'll get back to you. It separates that, puts it at the end, and it says action items / do outs. And it'll tell you from a 2-hour conversation what's next to be done, so you can do follow-ups, right? And that's the Plowed, P-L-A-U-D. They've got another one that you can wear around your neck. But I like this one because it fits right in my little day planner that goes around, and it just fits right in there, with the business cards and all that. I mean, boom, there it is, right? So easy to take out. You put it in your pocket, like I said, it goes to the back of the phone or in the room, or keep it in your pocket or keep it in your notebook, and you can record, and it has really good sound quality. But like I said, the problem is it's AI on somebody else's system. So I don't know private. I'm not going to rely on it for privacy. So I'm not going to use it for, if you're interviewing someone for historical, I will, but for actual casework, I'm not going to use it because I don't know where it goes. Right. But if you have a closed system that you can get that thing on, like we're kind of working on with one of the clients down in Florida, then that would be great, right? That's a cool system. But for purposes out there, if you guys are doing historical investigations, yes, the Plowed is a good thing, but make sure that you maintain privacy. You don't want to get yourself in trouble by recording something you're not supposed to. Check that out. Okay, so going forward, this is where the high tech portion is about to come in here in the cabin. So going back to Adler, so that's how I did it. Now, how Adler does it is he separates it out into 4 phases. And he's really good. I love the way he did, because there's 2 versions, well, 3 versions of this now, but 2 technical versions. Let's add this to the stage. Let me just check Nakamura. We're still good? Okay. Just making sure. Okay. So what Adler does is pretty good. So we know about Mortimer Adler. He actually he was a board member of the Encyclopedia Britannica, taught at Chicago and Columbia, he called himself like a philosopher, but he was excellent at doing education. So back in, I believe 1943, he wrote the first book on how to read, and he updated it in early 1970s because he recognized there was a change in how people were reading. And oddly, which surprised me, and I looked it up, why I think happened, was he updated it And because he realized that more people were reading. And I went, what? What do you mean? More people were reading in the late 1960s, early 1970s that had been when he started this from 1939 to about 1943. And that just seemed counterintuitive to me. But then he kind of goes in and explains it. And I looked up the historical trends. Two things. Number one, in 1939 to 1943, some people didn't even go to high school. Most people did not go to college. If you read a book, it's going to be the Bible, and it's going to be maybe a technical manual when you go to your work, right? But even then, it's mostly just word of mouth. If people read, a majority of the people would just read for entertainment, right? Pulp novels, dime novels, magazine, entertainment, just kind of emotional. You didn't need to understand it like you do, for example, in a college course or a high school course. That was left for kind of, what we call upper class. I don't use like the word upper class, but the upper class would use that in there. But by 1970s, because of changes that occurred post-World War II in American society and education, everybody, right, needed that opportunity, right? So in other words, if you had the drive and the desire, it didn't matter your background or your economics, was the theory anyway, you're going to go to college, right? You can go to college. And so suddenly the colleges are just flooded. There's a boom in college education. There's a boom even in high school education with folks that needed to know how to read. And he even shows that I think it was University of California, in 1971 or 1971, out of 40,000 that went through the system in a couple of years, they had to do remedial reading for 20,000. About 50% of college students at that one college had to have remedial reading because they weren't ready by the time they hit college to read. We think that's a modern problem, but that was just a problem of the expansion of what we were expecting people to do, and the high schools weren't prepared for it. And a lot of places that families that now both parents work and they're gone, they didn't have that ability. That's why you had things like Sesame Street come up to try to teach kids, some stuff that parents used to teach, that now everybody needed. So we needed better English literacy because now we're reading not just for entertainment, we're reading more in depth. So that's why he updated this, and he's open about this. Why in the update, because that's nice. Sometimes authors will update things and they don't tell you what they're doing. And they'll try to mask their mistakes. So good for Adler. He's like, this is why I did it. This is why I brought in a co-author with me on this 1970s edition. So he goes in that right away, which is great. So you already know what's the difference between the old version and the new version. Sometimes they don't. I always go for the old version first. I couldn't in this case. I had to get this thing quick. So I got it in, which I'm glad I did, because this is a refined product. He even says what he added to it. He's very upfront. This is what I added. This is what was not much taken away, but this is what it was added. This is why we did it, why we re-released it, which is good. Some authors won't. So that's why you always want to get old print versions if you can, and then compare to the changes later. And I've noticed some very political changes. I mean, what we wrote about in 1941 was not what we wrote about in 1946. I have a great old books from the China yearbook. And what they wrote in 1943 is very different than what they wrote in 1947 after, for example, the Tokyo War Crimes trial and everything kind of worked out. They were writing a different book. It was fascinating. So that's interesting. But anyway, he goes into this. And so the first thing you do is you look at that, you look at the introduction. He's good because he does it. If the author doesn't do that, you kind of compare, look at earlier versions and why he changed and what they changed. But we're going to go forward here. I'm going to do this. And let's do this. I said I'm in a cabin juggling things. Okay, now we're going to go over here. And we're going to go over his stuff. Yep. Hopefully this will show up. Aha. Look at that high tech. So, yay. All right. And again, so Adler breaks it down to 4 levels of reading. And this is actually very good. This is for everyone. So the elementary level is what you pretty much should have been taught in school. Your mom should have taught you. But some kids don't have that ability, like your mom or dad. That's just word formation, right? What do the letters make words? What do the words mean? Sentences are put together, that type of thing. The mechanics of reading, that's elementary. And that should happen, before you're 5, really. I mean, that's that's an early thing. But if it doesn't, that's kind of basic. But it needs to be done, right? Everybody needs that building block in there, and then understand what the words mean. And he goes into about 3 different processes. There's the building block: cat, hat, sat, mat, fat, where you take the letters and you sound out the letters, and then that becomes a word. He talks about the phonics, where you kind of break that down. And then he talks about another one that was popular in the 20s and 30s, which is the whole word. You take the whole word in. I learned both like almost simultaneously. So Dad would get the little school blocks and you could play around with letters and then that. But then I would look at a whole word and I knew what the whole word was, right? Because he would talk it. It becomes narration. It becomes a conversation. Once you have the grasp of conversation as a kid, you can go ahead and do the book that way. But you're still learning words and how to spell it out and all that sort of thing. So that's elementary. But then now you know how to read. Now you can actually do inspectional reading. And this is things like skimming the book. Okay, I'm going to inspect. Do I even want to spend my time to read something? Looking quickly and saying, okay, is this worth my time, right? The quick scan, the overview, looking at inspectional, right? Checking the block, what A, B, C, D, what's his thesis on a surface level? What is involved in this thing? What's there? That's inspectional, right? Now the analytical, okay? And that he talks about is now I'm going in there and what is the author really saying? That's where you go kind of page by page. This is where you skim over it quick. Now you read it once through, according to Adler. You'll read it once through by itself. If you don't understand a word, don't stop. According to Adler, don't stop and go back and figure it out and then go in there. Just read it and understand the context that the word is used. And he says most of the time, you can figure it out just by the context where that word is. And so just go through there. What is the author? What's the main point of the plot that the author's saying? And then go back and start to parse it out within that book. What is the author telling me? That's a one-on-one conversation. What is the author telling me? What is the author's point? What does this mean? And then you go through it and you do it. And then the second reading, now you can go in and say, okay, let me figure out what that word means to make sure I understand it correctly within context. And then you go, yeah, okay, that's pretty much what I guessed. I learned a new word today. Thanks, thesaurus. But sometimes you're like, oh, that didn't mean what I thought. And then you've learned. But learning is occurring. You've improved your lexicon. But that's analytical, but that's a solo book, right? That's a singular book, singular author using that. The highest form, the fourth phase that he says, is syntopical. And that's the one where you begin to compare books together. And as I showed you earlier, that's how I thought you should do it. And that, for example, is these guys, right? I'm using these two. Okay, this thesis of Carthage and why it initially was successful but then failed. This is why Rome was successful. All right, do these line up? Where are they similar? Where are they dissimilar? And that sort of thing. That's syntopical, right? I'm using these two against each other, so to speak, or with each other. Or you can do it as I did with my dad with Rape of the Mind. Okay, I do my notes. I'm arguing or agreeing with Juice Merleau, Dr. Merleau, and then Dad goes in there and then he talks about it. That's syntopical with my dad. So being the author and then with a subject matter expert. Okay, now we're going to compare notes, right? So I'm synthesizing that. So, and then you can do all three. If I had another Rape of the Mind book, I could compare that. And Dad actually did with the Theory of Collective Behavior by Neil Smeltzer, which was a good one. So that's basically Juice Merleau in there. And then another way that you can organize information, that's Adler, Mortimer Adler. Another way to organize information when you're working on the fly is index cards, right? And these are fun because this is from the oligarchs, right? When I'm studying the oligarchs, now I have multiple books, right? I've really, really got all this information. I've gone through multiple books. I've read, I don't know how many on oligarchs, right? That sort of thing. And now I've synthesized as much as I can. I write as much as I can in a single notebook, right? I've got it here. I've got the basic points, but now I need to really work this case, right? So in a real life case, I've interviewed all the witnesses. I've gone over the forensics investigation, if there's forensics involved. I've gone over timestamps. I've reviewed the video. I've done every lead I possibly can. Now I want to put all this information together. And you can do that historically with these, right? So you list out the people, right? What are the Rhodes scholars, right? So you go in and then you get your own information from source docs, put it together, and then you set that information up, right? I don't have a bulletin board per se, but then you start looking at the links, right? What comes first, what comes second, and you play around with this information, right? Okay, what about this? What about that? That doesn't make sense, right? And you have your bulletin board, you're doing it, with the string, the murder board, as they call it. Now I'm putting it together, right? And that's part of the syntopical of the next level. I would even argue a fifth level with synthesis, right? So I'm comparing, I'm working it, I'm synthesizing it. Now I own the information. It's all in my head, right? You feel like you can write a book, if you actually had time and I knew how to write entertainingly. But that's basically what you can do. And now prove your theory or not on your own terms with everything in together. And then you write that out and then you bring that in there. So that's what I like to do with these notes and everything. So you pull all that information in there and then, a little bit about the subject and you can kind of work forward. So that is Adler in a nutshell, which is great. And in fact, if you're lucky, you can kind of see his interview with his co-author on that one, Charles Van Doren, that he brought in for the 1970s, because they were redoing the Encyclopedia Britannica in the 60s and 70s, right? So in other words, he was looking at that information and really, really delving it in the 1960s and 70s, and he wrote literacy. He believed that people should read the classics. Absolutely. They should read the classics. He also was in the Thomistic Institute studies. So he was looking at St. Thomas Aquinas and really delving into that underlying. So he was born, as he said, secular Jewish, but he converted to Christianity. It was Episcopalian because his wife was Episcopalian. And then after she died, he said, okay, I can probably convert to Roman Catholicism and she won't beat me up. All right, so he converted to Roman Catholicism because of St. Thomas Aquinas, right? He recognized that logic, which is an Aristotelian logic, moved into Christianity. So that was his mindset, right? In other words, he was very good at organizing information like we used to, but we've shifted over to emotional based nowadays. And I would say that would probably be the next revision if he was still alive. He passed away in 2001 at the age of 98. Very long life, very blessed. But we were blessed because he has a good system here. I'd never heard of it or seen it until Mike mentioned it 3 weeks ago. And I'm glad he did, because I'll probably refine some of my systems in here and incorporate that into the Think Like a Detective course, the building blocks and forward on that. But a really good system. I would recommend it. I would say this is one of the rare recommendations that you could go with the latter version, because, like I said, he says what was included in his what was carried over from his 1940 and what he changed from his 1940 to his 1967 version and his 1972 version. But he says what was changed. He was very open about it. And his pattern of behavior in the beginning, he's pretty open about modifying and adapting based upon new evidence or new techniques and why he did it and why the foundation is the same, right? So his fundamental principles don't change. It's just you have to modify and put some bells and whistles on it to get that fundamental principle delivered and inculcated into the people reading it. So I would say go ahead and get the this version is, this is the 1972 reprint. It's a Touchstone edition, 2014. It's the one I have. I'd say go ahead and get this one. It's the one on Amazon, pretty easy to get, usually same day delivery. So go ahead and grab that. That's a good one. Give it to your kids, all right, or teach your kids on that. And if you want, again, we've got that pretty neat course. I like it. Think Like a Detective. And then my daughter's got that detective club, and she actually reviews things like, as a parent, you have a 9-year-old or 15-year-old, and they play games, right? But you want them to think, you don't want them to waste their mind. Which detective games that they have on Steam and all those little downloadable games, which one of those are actually pretty good, that do means, mode of opportunity, make you think, are logical and appropriate, age appropriate, right? For junior detectives, as she calls it, the junior gumshoes. That they're not going to, you don't want your kid exposed to blood and death early on, right? So maybe farm animals, but if you're worried about that, she screens those and lets you know. So she does game reviews specific for the investigatory process, right? In other words, okay, is this really kind of investigatory, or is this, just kind of fluff, and they put a fedora on and call it a day. So there's that. Now I'm going to show one thing. We're going to go into the criminal defense investigation technique. And then we'll call it a day. We won't do the Christmas today. I'm going to set that separate for Thailand history. I think that's a better one by itself. And then we'll wait for Michael whenever he's available to get on, because he can talk about some of the modern stuff with that and what's happening in a more larger geopolitical sense. All right, so what am I going to do with this one? All right, let's do this. Move the camera back in. All right, so hopefully you guys can see that. So this is one technique that I like to use, and usually we have colored highlighters, but in the move to the mountain cabin, I didn't bring the colored highlighters. I have these little kits, which I love. So I'm a freak for fountain pens. So yeah, and these are kits that you can fit in your pocket or in your bag. They're pretty easy. They're tins, so they're waterproof. But this is my basic, hit the archives of the library, or go interview somebody. And then, this guy, when it's better, fits in there. But these are different colored. These are the stocks in there. And they're the Coecos, and they're really good quality. So Coeco ink and Coeco fountain pens. This is their Sport. You just got to open up as a fountain pen. They're sealed in there, but you can write in different colors. So what we're going to show now is I'm going to see if this is what I use. Usually you do different highlighters. And I can do a highlighter here. So actually I'm going to do an abbreviated version real quick and see if I can do this and it'll show up. But you should have different colored highlighters. So for example, a blue, a red, a green, but you'll pick a color. It's running away from me there. You'll pick a color. There we go. And what you want to do is in a report, normally you get a report. This is a fake police report, right? And this is a police report. You'll get the statements from the police that interview all the witnesses, and then you'll get the police report. Like if he was involved in it, you'll get his statement. Sometimes you can get a transcript from a body cam. Sometimes not. You just get the raw one, and you have to generate your transcript. But what you want to do is you want to go through and analyze it. Now, this is on an investigation of, for example, you're doing criminal defense investigation. Again, Brandon Perrone, fantastic course out of Florida, highly recommended. I mean, super awesome. But if you are investigating a historical case, right, like his like say his claims about, who in Hollywood were collaborators with the CCP, right? The genocidal CCP. Okay. How you could do the same thing, right? You can take their page and work it out. When somebody says what happened, especially like war, things about war. There's a lot of flaws in war books. I can't tell you enough how when you read something about, especially World War II, they garble everything. And you're like, what are you talking about? If you really get into it. But what you'll do is you'll pick a color. So for example, this yellow will be the who. Or the what, or the when. So your basic questions: who, what, when, where, how, and why, right? And the why you really don't know. So it's the who, what, when, where, and how. And then you'll highlight everything in that on one color. So all of your who is going to be one color. And then all of your when is going to be another color. And then what you do is you extract it out by color, right? So I can just go down the colors and I know when. And then I write a timeline of events, right? And then it's just this, right? So once you've extracted your timeline, then it's easy to see, right? Okay, where did that person of interest, where were they at what time? When did they say what happens? And then if another witness, I have another timeline, and I can compare those two timelines. And I say, wait a minute, there's a distraction, because he says he heard the shot at 5:15 p.m. This person says they didn't hear it until 6:15. Where's the distraction? And then you look for the third witness, and he says, I saw this guy walk out of the car at this time. That matches the description of like one of your POIs or something. So that's one way to do it, but you need to extract that information out, much as we did with, the little cards, but you extract it out and you put it on a timeline so you can see it. Because if you're trying to get a timeline of this and you're going back and forth looking at the timeline, errors are going to be introduced into your mind. It's just too complicated, right? You want to extract it out. And the way to do that, let's see if I can work this, is you just say there, right? So for example, this is Monday, 1995, 6:55 p.m. Bam. Got it. Now I go down here. Here's 7:15 p.m. So I've already read it. Now I'm just going through it. There's 7:43 p.m. Bam. Right? Here's 8:20 p.m. Bam. 5:45 p.m. 7:40 p.m. Right? And then you do the who and the what in a different color, and you go through. There we go. You go through, and then you extract those out. Now I know, because sometimes people in their descriptions bounce around, like you see here. He's talking 7:40 p.m., but then he goes back to 5:45 p.m., right? But if you're reading it like this, in our mind, we tend to think that this is chronological. This is the beginning, this is the end, and this is what happens. No, he's jumping all over the place in time, right? And the police are just writing down what he says, right? They're just writing as he says, or a transcript is as somebody saying, and they remember something here and then they put it there. But our minds are geared to this. So we're eliminating those errors. We're eliminating those inherent biases that we have in our perception, and we're writing it out. Now I've got something I can work with. It's an organized system, and I can now begin to look and get a better idea of what actually happened, because this is actually chronological. This isn't. This is just descriptive, which bounces all over chronologically. But the best way to do that is just different colors that you can go out. And you can do that in a history book as well. I love timelines, right? Especially now with one good thing about AI is you can program it in there and it'll make you a timeline. You give it the raw data, you say, take it out. It'll take it out, and then it puts it in a timeline. We can't use it for cases, like I said, because it goes into this stupid databases that they'll probably sell it. But on history, yeah, you can do that, and it'll produce that for you, right? And that's one technique that, like I said, Brandon Perrone came up with, and it's fantastic. And that's one thing you can do in history as a technique to be able to do that. So I love doing that. It's great, and it opens up a lot. And sometimes you'll see the author, they just get confused with timelines. And they'll put narratives in there, especially like the road to war with the United States and Japan. They put the cart before the horse more often than not, because when you look at a timeline, you say, your narrative doesn't hold, right? They're trying to sell you a book. They're trying to sell you something. So as one example in the Pacific, the road to war, everybody, I recommend the interview with Masako Ganaha that she did years ago. While I was doing it for the NECSC. They said, where are we with the war with China? Are we ready now if China does like a Pearl Harbor attack in the United States? And the answer was not just no, but heck no, because the United States prepared for war with Japan since 1907. We started the planning full-fledged by 1911. 1923 was the full-scale exercises every year on that plan. And I mean, whole of Navy, there was Marines involved, U.S. Army, coastal defense in California, and civil defense in Hawaii. It was insane. Philippines, you name it. But when you put the timeline and you put it out there and you extract all of that information and you just put it in a non-narrative data point, you're like, nope. This surprise is no, it doesn't happen. And you can do it now. And it helps you. The reason we say this in current world affairs, and one of the things that, for example, Michael Young does pretty good, is he puts that out there. He knows the historical pattern. You're not confused about what happened in the past. You've got a pretty good idea about what happened in the past, warts and all, right? It is what it is. There it is. That's what the evidence supports. And then you transpose that same model now. It's like, yeah, it's the same pattern, same thing, right? It's no surprises. It happened before. The problem is that people want to get into narratives, right? I'm selling you emotion. I'm selling you this. And then you get confused because you're like, well, the fact pattern doesn't match because nobody's told you how you're supposed to feel about this whole big thing yet. And they try and you're like, this doesn't make sense, right? So extracting those things out, looking at things logically, looking at how to read a book like Jonathan Adler does, goes a long way. And so best thing you can do is for your kids, your grandkids, especially grandparents are a phenomenal resource for kids because the parents are doing the day-to-day. I got to cook, I got to clean, I got to change diapers. But the grandparents, the more that they're able to kind of work with the kids on teaching them, helping them read, and that sort of thing. And you can give your life lessons to that. That's very, very important. So as a grandparent or a parent, teaching your kid not just reading by itself, but comprehension of that reading, ask them questions, have them learn as a dialogue with the author, right? What does the author say? What about this, right? Go into that. What do you think he's thinking? What is going on here, right? What are they trying to say? Work those things through so that it becomes second nature for your children. There will be a tremendous advantage, especially nowadays as more and more and more of kind of the younger generation, unfortunately, is click paste. What did AI tell me? Bam, bam, bam. And they're cut paste. AI said it, therefore it's true. And they're not thinking, they're not rationally looking at it going, that doesn't make sense, right? There's some information not here. And that's important. So, and then go buy Coeco pens because these things are great. Any questions on that? And then I think it's good to actually cut this one short, because we've got to go up a mountain and look for drones. But I think we're good. Oh, my eyes. Any questions there? Nobody came in? All right. Well, hopefully this was useful to everyone. Hopefully it actually transmitted out there, but it should be good. And have a good day. If there's any questions, we'll repost this. You can put it in the comments and we'll get to it, or you can direct message me on it. We talked a lot of stuff here, a lot of techniques, but I think it's good. It's good. If you have your own techniques that work for you, great. Yeah, just keep doing it. As Adler said, what reading speed, whatever works for you, right? Reading technique, whatever works for you, the most effective. Try some new ones, see if they work for you. If they don't, modify it. But it should be good. So anyway, thank you very much for stopping by. Please like, subscribe, all that stuff. Like I said, this is a hobby, right? This isn't my main thing, but it's very helpful for people that do support, because then I can take time off and, from regular investigation work and kind of help people out with this. If you have a historical investigation you want us to look at, please give it to us. Understand, though, that it has to be done in between, real world investigations or other clients. We have some legacy clients that we're on call with all the time. So sometimes it may be a delay getting to what your project is, but we will get to it as best we can when we can. And then it's very helpful, and we love learning. So bring us questions. We love investigating everything. So everybody stay safe out there. Thank you very much for tuning in this morning or today, wherever you're at, and have a great day. Thanks again for stopping by.